Hey there, it's Anna Wild, the Birth Whisperer, your guide from a bad birth to a better birth, and I am just so excited. I have to share this little video, a talk between me and Robin Youngson about the relationship between midwives and obstetricians and the conflict that can happen between these two groups who are both doing their very best to care for women and get good outcomes for mothers and babies, but sometimes just the way that midwives and obstetricians look at birth and how birth can be and what's the safest way to help women have babies can be a huge area of conflict, and is an area of conflict globally. And Robin Youngson he's an anaesthetist, a New Zealand anaesthetist, and he's got really fantastic experience in making healthcare and birth more compassionate. And in particular, how can midwives and obstetricians and anaesthetists get on better so that the outcomes are good and that women have good birth experiences. So here's his fantastic story of how a group of midwives and doctors in Auckland, New Zealand got on better and how that impacted the outcomes in their hospital. I think one aspect of things that I've learned from you already, Robin, about how your personal experience of how epidural rates and caesarean rates have been impacted by compassionate care. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just so fascinating.
Sure. It was some really remarkable work we did at Waitakere Hospital in West Auckland. This is going back more than 10 years, 12, 13 years ago. There was a time when the relationship between the independent midwives, and in West Auckland they're fairly feisty lot, the relationship between the independent midwives and the obstetricians and the anaesthetists had really broken down. And for viewers who are watching this from outside New Zealand, we should perhaps explain that we have a wonderful maternity system in New Zealand where fully independent midwives who have fully independent practice are funded by the government. So mum has the right to choose an independent, in effect a private practitioner, to do her antenatal care, labour care and postnatal care as her own kind of private midwife, and that's funded by the government. And the midwives come with a very powerful and strong philosophy of childbirth as a natural process. And of course, the obstetricians and anaesthetists never see that. The only childbirth they see is the complicated, the risks, the disasters. So these two groups of professionals have utterly different worldviews and very different beliefs. And the midwives came with a belief that the rate of medical intervention was really excessive and was causing harm, and there's really good scientific evidence to support that belief. We're doing far too many medical interventions, far too many Caesars, and they just believed the obstetricians just wanted to do operations and technical procedures, and so they tried to protect the mums from the doctors by looking after the mums and not telling the doctors when the trace wasn't so good or things were starting to get a bit risky, because they were hanging out to try and achieve a normal birth without medical intervention because they believed that could be harmful. The experience of anaesthetists and obstetricians is that these bloody independent midwives who cared nothing about patient safety and were highly politically motivated would conceal, bad care and increasingly severe complications until we're really in trouble in the severe fetal distress, and then they make a phone call and call the obstetrician in, and then so the obstetrician and the anaesthetist keep finding all these disasters where the midwife does not appear to have provided safe care, and they have to rush in a very stressful situation for a mum they've never met before and try and rescue the mum and the baby. And it's horrible in the middle of the night to do that. Very stressful. You don't have time for an anaesthetic or medical or surgical assessment. You just got to rush to theatre and do your best. So these two groups of professionals had beliefs about each other that were very damaging and self-reinforcing. And as a result, there were a series of bad outcomes, bad events, and things came to a crisis. And the C-section rate, which was well below, it was 15 or 20%, shot up to nearly 30%. And there was a midwife taken out for disciplinary processes, and an obstetrician also, and a lot of anger and distrust, and the whole thing was going out of control. So I was clinical leader of the hospital, and I got support from a very courageous general manager to intervene in a way that really attended to the beliefs and the relationship between these professional groups because I knew nothing else would help. So we had a very famous event that became known as the Big Day Out. And we designed a workshop for about 30 people and 75 turned up. So we had a very large number of independent midwives, hospital midwives, mums just representing the patient, all of the obstetricians, some anesthetists, pediatricians, and the room was just so full of anger. And we had a very skilled facilitator who said, well, we're just going to explore what happens in the communication between all these different groups. And no one would do role play. It was the senior doctors were kind of not making any eye contact and kind of wrapped up in fetal, position because they were so scared. And he began to do role play using chairs to represent the different parties. So what did the midwife chair say to the doctor chair? And doctor chair, what did the midwife chair just say to you? Can you just feedback what it is you heard? Midwife chair, is that what you said? No, absolutely not. He demonstrated that people were unable to hear each other. And eventually after an hour, people said, this is ridiculous. I'll role play being it. So people began to role play in their own roles. And by the end of the day, we'd actually had reverse role play. We had an independent midwife role played being an obstetrician with all the arrogance and the kind of attachment, and she did a brilliant job. And there was an anesthetist role play being a patient, and I mean, it was amazing. And at the end of the day, there was one of the independent midwives stood up and said two really remarkable things. She said, I've learned two things that really surprised me. First of all, that these doctors care as much about the mothers and babies as we do. I never knew that, she said. I just thought they wanted to do operations. And the second thing I've learned is that they have an incredibly stressful job and they deserve our support. We should be caring for them. And there were kind of all these knives sticking out of her back because she was letting down the side of the midwives. So that allowed us to start a monthly forum where the same facilitator taught us the skills of dialogue, taught us not just to hear what someone was saying, but to make sure that we could feed back and let them know we'd heard exactly what they said and not put our own spin on it, to uncover our assumptions, to find some common values and goals and aspirations, because we all wanted to provide the best care for mums and babies. And this went on for many years. And the facilitator, it took him 9 months to teach us how to relate in true dialogue and really uncover assumptions and build trust. And I thought that was cute because on the 9th meeting, he made no intervention and said, well, you don't need me anymore. Now you will have the skills of dialogue. And I thought, well, that was cute. That was a gestation period for learning trust. Well, over the course of the next 2 years, the C-section rate in the whole hospital fell by 30%. The number of babies with a poor APGAR score went from 6% of births to 1% of births. And the rate of patient complaints to the hospital fell by a factor of 3. The staffing levels went from crisis with rosters falling over to fully staffed and a kind of waiting list. And when I left 12 years later, and we had a big farewell dinner, almost all the same people were there and the same relationships. So it's been very sustained change. And those were the most remarkable and biggest improvements in clinical outcomes of any maternity unit in Australia and New Zealand that I've ever seen. We benchmarked against more, 50 or 60 units. So it just showed that the quality of relationships and trust between all the parties in care has a profound impact on clinical outcomes. And the editor of Quality and Safety in Healthcare heard me speak about this at a conference in Singapore and said, you've got to write a paper. I'm commissioning you to write an editorial on this. And I've never seen it repeated. I've never seen any other hospital really attend in a courageous way to the quality of relationship. Everyone's scared of kind of interpersonal relationships and bullying and so on. So, which is sad because that intervention cost us about $2,000.
If you've enjoyed this, then please share it because the world and mothers and babies need doctors and midwives to get on with each other and respect each other so that everyone can have a better experience around birth and have great, safe, positive outcomes as well.